After years and years of hype and anticipation, it was finally here. DC's greatest, most coveted heroes united in a real-life feature-length film adaptation of the Justice League. And as the public saying goes, the movie was magnificent. Defied all expectations, proved skeptics wrong, showed fans once and for all that the DC universe is finally on track to—
That's not a saying.
Huh?
That's not a saying.
No, but I mean like—
That's not a saying. That's the opposite of what the saying is.
Oh. Right.
Oh, son of a bitch.
In all honesty, while I personally am at a point in life now where works of fiction don't really get under my skin anymore, seeing Justice League in theaters opening night did leave me pretty bummed out and disappointed, simply because it wasn't very good. Now, as with every major release today, I've heard there are people who support it, and that's fine. If you liked it, great. I wish I did too. I wish I liked every film I see, I just don't. But still, whether you were a dedicated DC hater or apologist, I think we can all look at what we were given and agree on one thing. It wasn't at the level of quality it could/should have been. If you sincerely think that what we got is the most a live adaptation of the Justice League could ever offer, then A, you most likely aren't a fan of these characters, or B, you're just flat out lying to everyone else and to yourself. There has already been quite a bit of talk about the movie's possible flaws over these last few months. Some mention mustaches and rushed clunky CGI, others hit or miss comedy and overwhelming similarities to Marvel, from mindless aliens to horned antagonists to snappy billionaire one-liners.
How did you get the house back from the bank? I am Iron Man.
Me, however, I think the issues reach past just singular moments visible on screen and instead lie deeper, at much more fundamental filmmaking levels. So that's why I'm here today. Try to figure out what exactly happened with Justice League, why it failed to live up to its immense potential.
I'm sorry, I know you mean well. You just didn't think it through.
Before we get any further, I just quickly wanna get through the infamous case of Joss Whedon. The Avengers director received quite a bit of backlash for his work on Justice League after he took over for Zack Snyder. And while this backlash resulted in his Twitter mentions turning into an absolute goldmine of quality content, most of the personal attack criticism aimed at him was uncalled for and unwarranted. Joss Whedon didn't ruin Justice League. He did the best he could with the restrictions he was given, which we'll get to soon enough. That said, his actions did kind of end up staining the movie's public image, specifically the way he handled the release. This here is Joss Whedon liking a tweet criticizing the main villain of Justice League the day it was hitting US theaters.
You've managed to piss off every single one of them.
That was the plan.
Not a great plan. When they come, and they will, they'll come for you.
I have an army.
We have...
After a pissed off reaction from fans, some people and outlets were quick to defend the move, shrugging it off as nothing, or even going as far as to say it's perfectly okay. No, it might be factually correct, but it's not okay and definitely not nothing. What it is a calculated move on Whedon's part in order to try to distance himself from the finished product, essentially screaming out "this isn't my fault" and turning his back on everyone else who worked on it. And the controversy didn't end there. Not long after, the director responded to this tweet related to the harassment exposés flooding through Hollywood at the time. Here he tells you how he came to pick the song for the movie's opening montage. And apparently he didn't choose it because it fit or because thematically it was the right choice. He just kinda dismissively stuck it in there to advance his own political agenda. Which is fine, but maybe not the best thing to say out loud. Then there was the whole "I tried" visual right when his credit came up, which to be fair could be just a coincidence. But if not, if that too is him taking a shot at the movie, then I don't know. Now how does something like this happen? How does a seasoned industry veteran behind some of the most successful films of all time suddenly sink down to the level of an unlearned newcomer? Was Whedon frustrated with his experience? Was he burnt by Warner Brothers? Most likely. But that doesn't excuse this. When you're in that kind of position, you should know better than to publicly badmouth your film just as it's coming out. Especially when that film isn't even really yours, but someone else's.
I had a dream.
A beautiful lie.
In the case of Justice League, I'd say the overall source of disappointment has less to do with what the movie is and more with what it isn't. Remember back to Batman v Superman. One of the biggest kinds of criticism that entry received was for lacking focus, which honestly wasn't wrong. Focusing so hard on what's to come did sadly end up taking away from what was right now. Although this might have been inevitable since they decided to opt out of developing characters one at a time and instead go straight for the big thing. And to be fair, it wasn't all that bad. The nightmare sequence was one of the more exciting parts of that entire film. If this is what lies ahead, count me in. But now that we're finally here, of course, turns out it wasn't what lied ahead. After all that time spent on setups and foreshadowing, the studio decided to just scrap everything and go another direction. Parademons went from intimidating warriors to just another bunch of mindless disposable grunts. Earth being properly invaded by alien forces was condensed into a brief expository flashback. Superman acting as the villain was now just Superman acting dumb for a couple of minutes. This is what we were sold, this is what we were given. So why the sudden change of direction? If you didn't know, Justice League was originally planned to be a two-parter, with Darkseid appearing in the follow-up. But since that plan fell apart, so did everything else. Every storyline we started, every future we were building up to, gone. Which honestly is pretty depressing. As a fan, this is something I was really looking forward to.
The end of worlds.
The thing Justice League made me finally realize is that DC has a villain problem, as weird as that sounds. And it's not only a problem, it's one of the problems. It's why Man of Steel still remains the best DCEU film to date, it's why Wonder Woman's third act couldn't keep up with the rest of that movie. Like I mentioned before, some fans accused Joss Whedon of dooming this project, but in truth it was doomed much earlier, the moment the filmmakers chose their villain. The movie is about DC's most significant hero, so obviously you'd think the villain would have to be just as significant. Their choice? Another interchangeable big hulking mass of CGI, this time with the name Steppenwolf. If you didn't know anything about Steppenwolf before watching Justice League, you probably won't know anything about him after watching Justice League. Think of him as Doomsday, I guess. A less strong, less known version of Doomsday, with less personality despite actually possessing the ability to communicate verbally. Well, communicate, as in he talks. Mostly about boxes or two boxes.
Mother. I know, Mother. You've waited too long for the Unity. Where is my mother?
Darkseid, Brainiac, the list goes on. If you have to choose a larger-than-life CG villain, which for a movie like this you probably do, maybe don't pick the one character whose only qualification is being an uncle to this other one and thus a good stepping stone for the future. Because a film about Justice League isn't supposed to be a stepping stone for the future. Or if you do, maybe give him more attributes than just his physical build.
Jesus. He is tall.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
There's an expression in Hollywood stating that if you can't make your movie too good, at the very least make it short. This is why films like Hitman and A Good Day to Die Hard always tend to clock in at around the minimum length of 90 minutes. And it's also why Justice League is 2 hours long. If you keep up to date on industry comings and goings, you might already know that behind closed doors, the production of Justice League apparently was one big mess. Shifting directors, changing storylines, mustache reshoots, looming deadlines, it was all quickly getting too much. And at some point the studio just kinda gave up. So they turned to Joss Whedon and told him that whatever you do, make this thing run under this amount of time. They naturally couldn't do 90 minutes since that would have been too obvious, so instead they settled on 120. And at that point, the game was over.
The program always gets twitchy with this footage.
You know who we are. We are going to attack you.
It's this ultimatum stance on runtime which made the film feel like such a big noisy pile of nothing. It's why there was no clear vision or emotion, why some story sequences led absolutely nowhere, why certain enemies inexplicably burst into inexistence just to leave behind important plot exposition, why instead of developing characters all time is spent on talking about history and boxes. It's why this thing became what it is now. A heartless, soulless monster built up from multiple different movies in order to be rushed out before the end of the year. Was Zack Snyder's vision actually unwatchable? Perhaps. But at the very least it would have been his vision. Having watched the DCEU develop over these last few years, I've arrived at a following analogy of Warner Brothers' relationship with fans. It's as if they're a starry-eyed little child desperately trying to satisfy millions upon millions of loud, foul-mouthed, impossible to satisfy parents. Every time they receive the slightest bit of criticism, they freak out and scramble to change everything up, even if this criticism isn't a real problem to begin with. Take Man of Steel for example, in my opinion still the best in the franchise. One issue some fans had was the fact that Superman's personality wasn't as pure and flawless as it had been always before. Superman can't kill people, not even when it's the only choice left. That was the complaint. Okay, understandable. So what does WB do? Trade out fully developed and personalized villains to focus more on hollow CGI monstrosities they can impale and blow up all day every day. Problem solved. Sticking with Man of Steel, another thing certain moviegoers weren't too amused about was how Superman wrecked the city of Metropolis while trying to stop Zod. It looked cool, but apparently wasn't true to the character. Fine. So what do we get instead here on out? Blank, empty wastelands that all look and play exactly the same.
The port is abandoned.
In Justice League there are two main action sequences. One takes place in a tall abandoned tube below ground, the other in a tall abandoned tube above ground. No variety, no consequences whatsoever. Problem solved. Batman v Superman, too dark, too grim. Not incorrect. So how to fix this? Have Bruce Wayne forget his parents are dead and turn into a PG jokester fitting for a children's cartoon. Well, maybe not a children's cartoon, that's still way too dark. Just make him pink. Problem solved. I could go on, but what I'm trying to get across is that in movies like these, true problems usually lie deeper than surface. They won't be solved by flicking a few different aesthetic switches or by bending to the wishes of every angry protest left in the comment section. And no, painting the sky red won't do the trick either.
I think that was beautiful.
Maybe I'm being harsh. I probably am being harsh. But as I'm sure you can tell, it is because I care. Like so many others, I really care. For example, as much as I enjoy Marvel's work, if you told me that franchise would suddenly collapse in quality starting from Infinity War, which most likely won't happen, I probably wouldn't mind. At least not the way I do here. I wish I could end this video by quoting Harvey Dent and remind how the night is darkest just before the dawn and that the dawn is coming and so on, but honestly, I'm not so sure that's true. We're getting 17 different Joker movies with 30 different Jokers, yet there's still not a word if Batman will get rebooted once again. The way things look right now, it seems like DC and Warner Brothers aren't in the business of making movies as much as they are in the business of announcing movies, officially or not. What saddens me the most is that I'm actually starting to be at a point where I wish the rights to this whole franchise would just go to Disney and Marvel, as dumb as that sounds. because I grew up with these characters and I feel they deserve to be more than just bad or mediocre, more than just a failure. There you go, those are my thoughts on Justice League. Take them for what you will, and be sure to leave your own thoughts in the comments below. Think I'm right, think I'm wrong, think I'm actually Kevin Feige with a bad fake accent here to destroy DC, let me know. Thanks for watching.